Saurabh. I'm happy you're here, and
Okay.
I'm happy you're here at Stanford, and I'm really looking forward to being smarter an hour from now.
Hopefully, yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh, hi, Shaq. So PEQdB is my company. We're focused on personalized sound quality and essentially listener preference and trying to find what's the best for everyone. Is this like full screen or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So-
that seemed low. Anyway.
So, yeah, in a 2017 survey, sound quality was reported as the most valuable feature for a headphone, followed by comfort. I guess nowadays people just buy the AirPods, don't really think twice. Maybe it sounds good enough to them, who knows? But the market is certainly growing. People are always using headphones, currently valued at around 70 billion, expected to grow to 160 plus billion by 2030. Loudspeakers are definitely a diminishing market compared to earphones in the modern day, but it's still pretty substantial, over $30 billion, expected to grow to 70 billion by 2030. So when comparing loudspeakers versus headphone, I decided to include this because of what Malcolm put in the description. But there's generally going to be significant differences in the sound incidence, reverberation, and how many vibrations you can feel, and all of these characteristics for loudspeakers depend a lot on the room, the positioning, and the loudspeakers' capabilities themselves in terms of output size. And between headphones, these differences are going to be very small. You can have in-ear headphones, over-ear headphones with noticeable differences in physicality, but it's not going to be as drastic as the speaker system, and certainly not any meaningful differences in reverberation or sound incidence.
So that's a rather telling statement. I guess it's good that the headphones have a more constrained environment.
Yeah. So, there's other issues which come up with that too. For example, closed back headphones can vary a lot across different heads because you can have leakage, and open back headphones are better at handling that because they have a built-in leak with the open back design. So yeah, sound incidence with loudspeakers is dependent largely on their inherent directivity, which describes the radiation pattern of the speaker at different frequencies and at different angles. So usually these Genelec speakers are two-way, so there's going to be a transition in the mid-range where the woofer crosses over to the tweeter, and at the lowest frequencies in the bass region, they're going to perform mostly omnidirectional, dispersing sound in all directions. But at the higher frequencies, you're able to tell what sound or what direction the sound is coming from because of the directivity, but also how you're going to perceive the sound incidence is dependent on the room. So you're going to have vertical reflections off of the ceiling, the walls, and if you're in an anechoic chamber, this directionality sound incidence perception is going to be different. For headphones, since they're sealed, the diaphragm propagates sound into the volume of space uniformly. So this is essentially forming a pressure chamber around your ear, and there's a system between the diaphragm and the ear canal where the diaphragm is essentially filling up the entire volume of space with sound, and this is occurring at all frequencies pretty much. Yeah.
This one is an open back one.
This is the open back LSD5, and this results in mostly minimum phase system, and this is I'll talk about this in the next slide too, but in the case of open back headphones, there's technically some negligible reverberation because sound is going out of the headphone, and you can also have it come in, but the direct sound field is the largely dominant factor. And when we're talking about in-ear headphones, there have been studies done on identifying at which distal points from the entrance of the ear canal can sound be identified as coming from a certain direction or not. And this was done with speakers positioned in an anechoic chamber, and then they would place a probe microphone at various points on the ear, inside the ear, and it was found that when sound incidence occurs from within the ear, it does not matter what direction the audio is, coming from. And for that reason, even if an earphone was unsealed, placed inside the entrance of the ear canal, you would not be able to tell the directionality
Well,
of
that's
it.
because you've lost all the HRTF.
Yeah, of course.
But if you have those in, you can.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So going back to the headphones.
Yeah.
Can you model the chamber as a single mode? So it's just pushing in and out, or is there multiple modes that?
Okay, I'm not really like understanding the question. So you're saying like,
I mean, is it a plane wave going in and out,
okay.
or are there multiple modes, and so it depends on how you put them on your head and.
So it's the response you measure will vary depending on like the position of the headphone. So it's not going to be like fully consistent, but the modeling of the system would be neither a plane wave or a spherical wave really, because like the driver itself is not propagating sound through an unimpeded volume essentially. It's just like I said, uniformly propagating into the volume of space. So like the size could be like 1 millimeter, 100 millimeters. It's still going to propagate the sound uniformly.
Okay.
And so as talked about earlier, the reverberation with speakers is dependent on how like echoic the room is or something. And with headphones, the reverberation is minimal. You can have open back headphones which will bleed sound, but generally you're hearing the direct sound with headphones. So that's a key difference between speaker listening and headphone listening.
Going back to Malcolm's question, I mean, that should matter, right? Like that's why the size of the headphone matters.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you have a larger surface, then there would be different modes on that surface. Like that has a very good sound states.
So that would be because of the size of the internal pad circumference. So like let's say, you know, the pad circumference that was contacting your skin was a lot smaller. This would physically reduce the vibrations you could feel on your skin. But since like the pad circumference itself is large, this is the area, the surface area of sound which you can actually feel. You're not feeling the surface area of sound that's propagating from the diaphragm. You're only feeling what's reaching your skin at the physical level.
Yeah, I think is there like a research or talks regarding the best optimal size of the headphone like pad?
So I mean, there's no like research done, but I'll get to this. So like for example, this was at a like hi-fi convention I went to in Newark, but basically what this guy did is he put subwoofer drivers in this headphone and it's unsealed, and you can feel the sound across this inside this entire internal pad circumference. And you know, you also have this subwoofer vest which you can feel, but this is just like, you know, you can do like a study or whatever, but you could also just put on this headphone and see that you can like feel the vibrations at any point where like the pads are interacting with your skin. And since this is like unsealed, it's actually an even more exaggerated experience. But with loudspeakers, you know, you could put a subwoofer behind your chair and feel more vibrations that way versus having them in the corner. And if you have a concrete room, you're going to feel less vibrations than if you have hardwood, because the hardwood is going to transmit the vibrations to your legs and stuff more than the concrete would, since it would be more inert. And yeah, with sealed headphones, you can typically feel vibrations up to the inner pad circumference of the headphones. And as far as like modern high-resolution speaker measurements go, they're typically done with a device called a Klippel near-field scanner, which takes a while to just capture thousands of different data points. And then one of the many measurements it can output is called a spinorama, which has the on-axis response, the early reflections, which just measures it at a different angle, and that's off-axis, and then the sound power, which is just, again, measured at a different angle, further off-axis. And then these traces are calculated by subtracting the difference from the either the on-axis and the early reflections, or the listening window and the early reflections. But
So what does early reflection mean in an anechoic chamber?
so they're not. So there would be no early reflections in an anechoic chamber. This is just a sound standardization model used for typical listening rooms.
Okay.
And then you could like calculate the predicted in-room response for a typical room, but it's not like a one-size-fits-all
But shouldn't
approach.
Shouldn't the early reflections be more telling of the room than of the speaker?
Yeah, so how this works is it's telling you the quality of the sound that's going to be heard at this like lateral point of the speaker. So you have a speaker here. How does it sound off to the side? And this is the sound that's going to bounce off the wall and reach you.
Oh, okay.
And if the sound that's being heard off to the side of the speaker is like timbrally accurate, then what arrives back at the listener is also going to be timbrally accurate.
Okay.
So that's the rationale.
Okay. That's what he said off access. I was confused.
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
Okay.
So this is a good speaker.
Yes, this is the Neumann KH120 second generation. This is an excellent speaker too. I mean, most of these like Pro Studio speakers are really good at this point in terms of high frequencies. So this is just like something I'm working on, but there's a lot of different like loudspeaker calibration softwares out there, like Dirac Live, SonarWorks. I feel like all of them have some issues in terms of the way they're being implemented, but what I would say would be a more ideal approach would, I mean, you take a
He's like Christmas, he's pulling out everything.
Yeah, you take a flat omnidirectional microphone and you would perform multiple static frequency response measurements where the listener's head would be. So like, you know, one side of the ear, but not like with the head in it for the measurement. So one side of the ear, other side of the ear, like maybe slightly above, slightly below. And then this would capture an effective listening window response where your head could likely be to listen to the audio. And you would capture this for both, for a stereo speaker system specifically, you would capture this for sound playing from all channels and individual channels. And for the measurements with all channels playing at once, I guess this is a lot for words, but you would observe the relationship between the traces. Like you can have different measured response here and a different measured response here, and you want to find out what artifacts are caused by reflections versus resonances in the room. For example, you could have a destructive interference dip occur at like 80 hertz here, 90 hertz here, and you want to decide what you should do with it. Probably nothing, because it's caused by reflection, not an inherent resonance, but you could have 100 hertz resonance appear in all of the measurement points, and then you would decide, okay, this is something worth attenuating. And for the higher frequencies, which are going to be perceptually dominant based on the direction they're coming from, you would want to calibrate based on the individual channel responses. And the reason we're using combined channel responses for lower frequencies is because sound sources couple to room resonances differently when operating in unison versus separately, and most bass content or low frequency content in music is in mono, so using single channel measurements doesn't make the most sense for calibration. But I guess this is why people use bass managed solutions with subwoofer systems, calibrating in mono below 80, 100 hertz, and then they would do individual channel measurements above that. But still, I found that even in that case, you can get differences with summation from the individual loudspeaker channels. But this is where room acoustics comes in, and you can optimize these things to be better for sure. And an optional step which people have been doing lately is using a multiple subwoofer optimization algorithm where you can essentially place a bunch of subwoofers randomly in the room, and then you would have different measurements at different places in the room, and then you would have a machine learning algorithm calculate the ideal gains and delays for each of these subwoofers such that the bass response could be flat sitting over there versus over here. And doing this manually is very difficult. And then, you know, you could finally, I think, tune bass, mid-range, and treble to preference once you've quantified all of these factors. And, you know, the target curve here is a straight line because research done by Dr. Floyd Toole at Harman International and other people have identified a flat on-axis sound as being the best from a single loudspeaker typically, but I'm not aware of any like significant preference research done with all of these factors accounted for. Would people really prefer flat on-axis with significantly more bass? I think that's a question worth asking.
Would you want to go back to the graph?
This one.
Yeah, was the x-axis is the hertz and y is the decibel.
Yes, that's right. It's measured at 1 meter.
Wouldn't that be kind of counterintuitive to our human listening perception that the higher the frequency is, the higher the decibel should be to reach the same perception?
So you're talking about the equal loudness contour?
Uh-huh.
That's a good question. So the point is here for the sound source itself to be reproduced accurately. So equal loudness contour, I mean, there's a whole range for this topic. Like at lower listening levels, people would be less sensitive to bass compared to 1 kilohertz. Then you increase the volume and sensitivity for bass changes. Similar story with high frequencies, but in terms of a listener preference, there's not really a direct correlation between the ear sensitivity chart in the case of loudspeakers, that is, because this is just describing how neutral the speaker is per se.
Oh, I see. That's more like a standard.
Yeah.
I think a better answer is the speaker just wants to reproduce what you give it
Yeah.
as accurately as possible,
Okay.
regardless of loudness perception. Or
Yeah.
You want this to be scientifically flat.
Yeah.
I see.
And yeah, in the case of headphones, head and torso simulators are most commonly used for headphone measurements. This is a Gross 45BB device, and this is an example of a Sennheiser HD650, which everyone knows about, measured on a Gross head and torso simulator. And these devices typically possess an ear canal, and eardrum system with varying levels of accuracy depending on how closely they want to resemble an average human. What data sets are used to even, quantify what is an average human is questionable. But this is one of the challenges with headphones. You're essentially calibrating to average humans rather than just individuals. And
So this is for a headphone or a speaker?
for headphones.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is the motivation behind the research we're doing at PEQdB? So I mean, we have the Harman target here. This has kind of been the standard for a while at the time of when we're starting this research.
Wait. So the Harman standard being the dash line?
Yeah.
And it's not flat.
Yeah. So I mean, listeners prefer to bass boost. They only let listeners choose a 105 hertz low shelf filter frequency with a fixed Q, so they're not able to adjust the range of preference for this. And they, I guess, haphazardly added a 3 kilohertz reduction to reduce this ear resonance because it was actually higher before. I'll get to this later, and then, I mean, there's more to talk about, but so yeah, we're currently.
Wait.
Yeah.
So you slip this in. So with speakers, you said you want them flat.
Yeah.
And
So with speakers, you're essentially measuring with a microphone outside of you. But if you place a microphone at your eardrum, you're gonna get a boost at 2
So
kilohertz.
this has anything to do with the pressure chamber formed by the pad?
No.
But I mean, this is trying to approximate something that'll give you a flat response in the brain.
Yeah. So I mean, it's sort of related to the diffuse field head relay transfer function, but I'll get to that later. So yeah, I was dissatisfied with the current headphone research by Harman and other people, and also, Harman studies were kind of about you let users tweak the sound to find what is best, but there weren't really any online tools where people could just do unbiased listening tests to find out what their ideal frequency response was. So I was like, why don't I just create a cool tool that does this? And that's what we did. And also we wanted to identify better aggregate headphone magnitude response target curves. And this is just a quick history on headphone target curves. People started off with the free field target curve, which is in solid blue. And what this essentially captures is the eardrum response of a flat speaker at a 0 degree angle of incidence. So it's coming straight from you in an anechoic chamber. I'm not entirely sure why people thought this would be a good calibration standard, but it was sort of replaced by the diffuse field header.
Come on. Just make sure I'm clear. So this is if you have an ideal source,
Yeah.
a plane wave, this is what you would receive in the ear canal.
At the eardrum, yeah.
Eardrum, fine. And so the argument here is that we want the headphones to produce the same.
Or at the argument at the
non-flat.
time. Yeah. The argument at the time
Yeah.
was that. But it was found that, you equalize a headphone to this target curve, it doesn't sound like the sound is coming from in front of you. And the reason for that has to do with the time domain behavior or the phase response. The free field system is not necessarily minimum phase in the sense that with the headphone, the sound is propagating into this volume of space uniformly, but with the free field system, it's predominantly being defined by the frontal interaction of your head-related transfer function. And how the diffuse field head-related transfer function is derived is you would take the eardrum measurement of sound arriving at the listener from all directions at equal intensities and at the same time, and that is said to be representative of what headphone listening is like with the sealed enclosure, or in the case of in-ears where you don't have any information, it's just going to sound like it's coming from all directions. And then you can see the Harman in-ear 2019 and Harman over-ear 2018 target curves. They were derived using a different head-related transfer function. I actually, none of this was really even specified in the research. I had to talk to Dr. Sean Olive about what exactly they did to measure their baseline head-related transfer function. But he said in a semi-reflective room, he took a Gross 43 AG, and then, which is just an ear attached to a plate, and then he attached it to a styrofoam mannequin and essentially rotated it around, performed multiple measurements, and was able to get a spatial average.
There's a weirdly downward trend for Harman 2018, right? If I were not.
There's a downward trend, or
Yeah, the over to the very top frequency
Yeah.
response, they're this weirdly decrease.
Yeah. So that's one of the complaints. I mean, we were having from listeners and just in general about the Harman curves. There were two rolled off in the highs, and they said they were only defined up to 10 kilohertz due to the standards, but people were still tuning headphones to the Harman target curves, and the diffuse field head-related transfer function does not have that much roll off on average, so it didn't really make sense to roll off the high frequencies that much. And also the in-ear target curve base level was decided by 10 listeners, and I don't know, there just wasn't that much rigor in the validation studies either in terms of comparing to different target curves. And
so I'm quite willing to believe the bass boost and people like that and the mid-frequency boost because there might be some resonances. I'm surprised that any serious audio manufacturer would think that rolling off above 10 kilohertz was the right solution.
They're just basically shrinking the field information down.
Yeah.
Shrinking the
So what rationale did they have for killing things above 10 kilohertz?
So I mean, it wasn't.
Are they all about 4 years old?
It wasn't necessarily that they were. It wasn't necessarily that they were trying to kill anything above 10 kilohertz. The baseline head-related transfer function that they used already had roll-off in the high frequencies. So they were essentially using the wrong baseline to start with to apply the modifications to. And when you compare it to accurate baselines from average people, then it looks very rolled off in that case.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is relatively older research. They're doing newer research. I wouldn't say it's any better, but a common topic that's brought up is personalized head-related transfer functions. Are they necessary? There was a study done on how much people like these different head-related transfer functions, and you can see H12, H3, all these numbers represent.
What are the axes here?
So the x-axis represents different head-related transfer functions.
Okay.
So these flat, dark, bright are different anchor profiles. H1 is just different human subjects,
Okay.
and the squares represent the personal ratings. And you can see across these different tests, brightness, richness, externalization, preference, these squares are not necessarily even at the highest subject rating for the individual personal rating. And the highest rated head-related transfer functions are actually that of the Neumann KU100 head-related transfer function and KeyMar, which are just generic devices like this one here. Yeah.
So what are you evaluating here? There's 4 different. Oh.
So there was like a jazz ensemble
Okay.
created or orchestrated with MIDI, and this was a binaural file. So we're trying to identify the like externalization. How much do you like the sound quality perceptually, and these other factors. And listeners on average rated the dummy head as having the highest sound quality than any of the individual head-related transfer functions, which was interesting. And
Which means the dummy head people did a good job.
and I mean,
People, the average person.
I guess when like creating the slide, I didn't necessarily like plan to talk about this, but I think there is a big disconnect in terms of the head-related transfer function movement in headphones and what is actually happening. Because let's say you want to simulate a loudspeaker system with signals measured at the eardrum, you're not actually feeling the sound vibrations from the loudspeaker system on your skin, and the impedance of the space is completely different. So it makes sense that there would be significant cognitive dissonance even if you did perfectly match the head-related transfer function to the individual. But I mean, there's certain things like the AirPods Max and Apple Vision Pro which do have head-related transfer function features. I would say the Apple Vision Pro does quite a good job of externalization, but yeah, I think there's still a lot of like research to be done in this phase, and that's why I was like talking about this part here, the loudspeaker system calibration proposal, using these fundamentals, applying that to how we're doing personalized head-related transfer function calibration for spatial audio. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in just the whole spatial audio field in general. But
did you say that Sean Olive didn't use like a proper mannequin? He didn't use a proper HRT after the Harman curves?
yes, that's correct. Let me actually bring that up.
And when you talked to him, did he tell you why, like, he made that decision?
So, okay. When talking directly to him, he said that, okay, so this is what they used, the Gross 43 AG, and it was custom fitted to so they used the custom head fitted with this two Gross 43 AGs, and I guess, like, at the time, like, they didn't have a Gross 45BB or something, which had the whole head and torso simulator built in. But I mean, it's weird. You look at these papers and like people in the community talk about them being peer reviewed, but they're actually not. They're I mean, most of the Sean Olive papers are convention or conference papers, and like I don't know like how strong the peer review standard is, but like 750 word pre-C, but like the complete manuscript was not peer reviewed. So I don't think that this research is necessarily like that thorough or should have been taken that seriously in the first place. But yeah, so they didn't use a proper mannequin for identifying the head-related transfer function of the measurement rig, and they were still using in-room measurements, so this would be in a semi-reflective room, so they were not necessarily capturing the diffuse field head-related transfer function. But this was still like early research though, so I wouldn't really like fault them for that.
One thing that I'm actually been thinking for quite a while is like, even though most of the headphones, hi-fi headphones here were either speaker. I don't know much about speakers, but for headphones I know most of them are still trying to reach for that Harman curve while they are doing their like innate like equalization rate. But does that necessarily mean the best way to make the equalization for headphones? Like that actually gave the most colorful sound. Like we were not really talking about any of those like monitoring headphones. We are talking about like for example, your obviously here.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll get into that.
Sorry, let's let you continue.
Yeah.
We've been asking lots of questions.
So I don't want to talk too much about this because this is, I guess, like outdated research. But for the original PEQdB target curves, like, I guess my vision was, oh, we'll just have an AI listening test where, you know, the algorithm gives various sound profiles, users give it a rating on a scale of -5 to 5, and then at the end of the test, you know, they would be given a magical sound profile that sounds the best. But I mean, there were a lot of issues with this. So it's a 40 trial listening test. Here are the various parameters relative to the average diffuse field head related transfer function of 47 individuals. And for the first 5 trials, the Gaussian process algorithm, so for the first 5 trials, the filter selection is random, and after the first 5 trials, the probability of improvement acquisition function we were using with the Gaussian process algorithm would determine what set of filters would give it the most information. But I mean, this is not like the most, I guess, scientific procedure, and the model results would be biased towards the average of the filter parameter set because there wasn't really a way to filter out, like, are any of these ratings real, or are these listeners just randomly guessing? But okay, so based on that, like, we were confident in our research at this time, but we did a verification test, of course, because how can you do science that's just like an initial study? So we did a comparative evaluation of a bunch of different headphone target curves using virtual listening tests. We tested 403 listeners. How accurate that number is, probably plus or minus quite a few, but we identified them by browser cookies, so just people taking the same listening test over and over again on their web browser. We would just average their results. And we had A, B, and no preference tests between 6 different in-ear and over-ear headphone target curves with a total of 151 different in-ear and 105 different over-ear
But people,
headphones.
the online people
Yeah.
who are listening through headphones, their headphones or through speakers?
Their own headphones.
And that you knew what they were.
So we're assuming that so this is going to be talked about in the limitations as well, but we don't have a way to verify that the user's selected headphone is the same as
Right.
what they're actually using, but we have a database of around like 7,000 different headphone measurements where they could select the headphone, and you know, it's possible that the unit variation is slightly off, but we're assuming that with the large number of listeners, numbers of headphones and over-ears tested, we're able to overcome the statistical noise.
So you have a guesstimate of the headphone type or a self-labeled headphone type,
Yeah.
and hoping large numbers will make it
Yeah.
still work.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So for the headphone measurement selection, these 3 databases are using standardized Gross measurement rigs. The rest are using AliExpress clone couplers, which I guess pulling out of my bag again, some more things. So all of these in-ear headphone measurement databases are done using this device called an IEC 60318-4 standard coupler, which is meant to simulate the ear canal and eardrum. But as you can see, this doesn't exactly look like an ear canal and eardrum, so it's not fully accurate, but it is pretty serviceable, I think.
And what's the point of, what are you trying to do with this?
No, it's very durable. So the point of this is what measurements we're using that the user can select. So let's say, okay, this is a soft ears volume S, that's the name of the headphone. Let's say a user has the soft ears volume S and they want to select it for the purpose of our listening test. We want to use an accurate measurement of this earphone. And how we're like identifying this, for example, is we can take the manufacturer's measurement of the earphone, compare it to the measurement from one of these databases, and we can see that the differences are, or which is the red line, is very similar. It's relatively within the IEC tolerance bars, which are the gray line, which is what the manufacturer of this device or Gross would specify the variation could be between these couplers. And the variation is pretty small, up to 10 kilohertz, which is the defined accuracy cutoff of this device anyway. And for that reason, we're able to justify using these online databases of headphone measurements. And we can compare, for example, Squiglink soft ear volume S to the manufacturers, and you can see the measurements are pretty similar. And then we can also look at other headphone measurement databases with other earphones, such as the Truth Ear Nova, and see that the variation in their measurements are also quite minor.
So the blue and the green lines line up,
Yeah.
and the red line is a difference, and that's within the ear bounds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And why not use BNK 5128 measurements? The BNK 5128 is a head and torso simulator which was released in around 2017. It costs around $50,000, and it's been very popular in like the IEM in-ear monitor community recently in terms of trying to find aggregated target curves. And the reason we're not using 5128 measurements is because of these low frequency rocking modes which occur. You can see in the case of the Moondrop Aria here, there is a resonance at like 80 hertz, but on the Moondrop variations, it occurs at a completely different frequency. And it's just, there's just too much inconsistency with the low frequency measurements. And when you look at the mean human ear canal impedance of 32 subjects versus the IEC 711 coupler, which we have here, we can see that this device is very different in the high frequencies, but it's actually not too different at these low frequencies. And I don't think there's anything here. I mean, it's still within the error bounds, but the differences that are showing up between in-ear headphones measured on the 711 coupler or IEC 60318-4 versus the 5128 in low frequencies don't really fully align with what the mean human ear canal impedance would show. But I would still say that the higher frequencies are definitely more accurate for in-ear headphone measurements on the 5128 than the 711 coupler. But I mean, still, for example, this Moondrop variations measurement, like I was able to identify that this earphone had the smoothest measuring treble before measurements even came out on this device, and the engineers for this didn't use this fancy device to tune this earphone either, so I'm not sure how entirely necessary it is. And for the EQ procedure for this verification test, we essentially equalized to the diffuse field heterolated transfer function first using these 15 filters, and then we convolved each of the different song clips we're using to the different target curves. And I guess there's discrepancies in the audio EQ algorithm, and we've been trying to figure out how to minimize the perception of these resonances past 10 kilohertz in our latest development. But yeah, basically this is just the differences in various earphones calibrated to this target response. So even when doing the listening test, you could have slightly different preferences or perception between different earphones.
You're trying to flatten a very non-flat curve.
Yeah.
With some very simple filters.
Yeah.
So why not do it the correct way with fully parameterized equalization? Why use these simple approximations?
What do you mean by fully parameterized?
Well, doing the Fourier domain so you can adjust the gain every frequency.
So, I mean, this has to do with the accuracy of these measurements in the first place. For example, this peak might occur at 11 kilohertz, and you're basing your filtering based on the measurement. Okay, you're gonna just add a dip at 14 kilohertz in that case. So, because of the limited accuracy of these measurements, especially at high frequencies relative to what people are hearing, we're trying to mostly leave the shaping alone of these. So
you're not trying to even out the wiggles completely.
Yeah, at the very high frequencies, but at the lower frequencies, the performance is relatively smoother, so we're able to hit the target curve more precisely. And yeah, we're just basing this on the average total energy, and that's how we're identifying the high shelf filter. And as for the songs we selected, we're using 4 different royalty-free tracks, so we're not copyright striked or something. And per target spectrums for mastering, it was identified that around a minus 4.5 decibel per octave slope from 100 hertz to 4.5 kilohertz is representative of the average musical content of thousands of different songs sampled. And looking at the song samples we have, it's very similar to this. I mean, plus or minus more than the expected energy at around 4.5 kilohertz or something. But, song choice can influence preference for headphones. If it's like wildly low in the high frequencies, you might prefer more treble.
Does this have to do more with how it's mastered, or?
Yeah.
Is there any tendency in terms of the choice of the genre of the songs, or they are just randomly selected?
So most of these are, these are all rock songs, basically. Yeah. Rock songs, yeah. I mean, we did tests with EDM at first, but I would say EDM was actually like better than the rock in some aspects, because people were more able to like identify, this is the bass I want versus like.
Shouldn't, if you really want to do a more personalized EQ based on like the target curve or your own target curve, like shouldn't the sound be actually randomly selected, like to fit most of the genres there? For example, I'm mostly like a classical music listener, so I chose Sennheiser because they have a better mid-range to hair-range response.
So this is a good question. The reason why classical music is often a poor choice for headphone evaluation is because most of the content is in the mid-range. So how are you going to identify the bass quality of the headphone or the high frequencies if the signal itself is not really full range? So we wanted to use relatively full range and spectrally dense musical content so that we're able to hear what's going on across all frequencies.
Makes sense, yeah. Thank you.
And here are the in-ear headphone target curves used. So starting off with the Moondrop VDSF target, this was derived by measuring Genelec speakers in Moondrop's ideal listening room with a head and torso simulator. And it would have a downward sloping response because of that. Then the PEQdB in-ear target, which was what I described earlier here, just slightly more preference than the over-ear target for bass was what we identified. And then we have the hi-fi endgame target, which is actually created by a friend of mine. It has a bit more bass, a bit more of an ear gain scoop, and a bit more treble. The JM1 minus 10 dB tilt it's being popularized in the audio community because it's, or essentially how this works is some people did some weird calculation with the BNK 5128 where they were like, oh, the external ear is not accurate enough, so we're going to push the weighting of the head-related transfer function for in-ear measurements based on the average head-related transfer function. So like, basically this JM1 head-related transfer function on its own on the 5128 is very similar to the ISO 11904-1 diffuse field head-related transfer function, which is the black curve we have here. And IEF Preference 2025, there's a popular reviewer named Critical who made his own target curve. It's very similar to JM1 with this minus 10 dB tilt. And I mean, again, also for this JM1 minus 10 dB tilt, the reason why I would say it's a problem is people are basing these measurements based on, they would measure an earphone on the BNK 5128 calibrated to some target curve with a slope applied because you see a speaker in a room, you look at the measurement, there's a tilt, so people thought that applying that tilt to headphones would make sense. But because of these low frequency differences where the 711 has more bass than the 5128, they're adding energy around 500 hertz to the 5128 targets when, I guess, converting them to the 711 standard. And then we have the Harman in-ear 2019 target curve. But yeah, so when we're looking at the results of what do people actually prefer? So despite the flaws in the methodology for the PEQdB IE target, I guess the ballpark of the filters were probably close-ish to the average preference, but the hi-fi endgame target did beat out all of these other target curves.
So what do these numbers mean?
So the top number is the win percentage or the score. So essentially
So the hi-fi.
So hi-fi
the
endgame target versus PEQdB, i.e. hi-fi endgame target wins 53.4% of the time, and 158.8 is the numerical amount of wins. The reason there are decimal points is because we're using cookie averaging. So if you could have a listener doing.
What is it? I don't understand what that number means.
Which one? The 158?
Yeah.
So every time a listener would select they prefer the hi-fi endgame target over the PEQdB, i.e. that would be +1 for the hi-fi endgame target.
Right.
And you can see like that's why this number is lower, because there were less times people preferred the PEQdB, i.e. target over the hi-fi endgame target. So yeah, hi-fi endgame.
So the top number follows is the preference for the column headings.
So yeah, the top number here is the percentage. So like PEQdB, i.e. column heading, 46.6% versus this, and versus VDSF and Harman, i.e. and all of these other target curves, the PEQdB and hi-fi endgame target had drastically higher win rates against all of these other target curves. So basically, like, the Harman target curves were preferred less than 70% of the time versus the hi-fi endgame and PEQdB target curves. And these standards people are pushing out, like the JM1 target curves, they're losing 20%, or they're winning only 20% of the time versus the PEQdB and hi-fi endgame target curves. So to answer your question about like how good like the Harman target would sound, this is, I guess, the answer. And when it comes to over-ear target curves used, we use the hi-fi endgame. Yeah.
Sorry. So this is people's real users, internet users,
Yeah.
headphones equalized to one of these standards.
Yes.
So they tell you what headphones they have.
Yes.
You're generating equalized versions for that headphone. So that's dependent on you knowing what the headphone is and knowing what its gain is.
Yes.
Which you said looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And then you're asking preference.
Yes, asking which one they like more, or if they think they sound the same with the top.
So I'm surprised that the numbers are so far off 50%. So people are actually able to express a preference.
Yeah, and we're not using any like data filtering either, in the sense
Yeah.
of we're like canceling out listeners who are rating them all the same. This is
Yeah.
the raw data.
Right. But the fact that it's not close to 50% means there's a real signal there.
Yes.
It's not just people flipping a coin.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Okay.
To make data valid for this table, does the user have to listen to all those like models, or they just pick random models they wanna hear?
Well, you pick the random model, right?
So yeah, the models are randomly sampled across the 24
see.
trials. And similar story with the over-ear headphone target curve test. We have some different target curves, the Harman over-ear 2013 as well as the over-ear 2018, which were just the target curves tested at various points in time. And we wanted to include all these target curves to see what like the differences really were. And the Keymar KB50XX with a -10 dB tilt was essentially the header-related transfer function measured on the Keymar device, which is kind of used for these headphone measurements. But it's kind of weird because there were a lot of these dips in the higher frequencies, and it's questionable if people would actually prefer that over like the smoothed header-related transfer function we're using as a baseline, such as these green and purple target curves. And I mean, again, the -10 dB tilt is what people thought would make sense, so we used that because it was a popular reference. And also Harman over-ear 2018 with the bass boost removed, so we're testing 6 target curves for this. And the results are pretty similar in the sense of hi-fi endgame is being slightly preferred over PEQdB OE, but all these other target curves are getting completely dwarfed in terms of the score versus these 2 target curves. Over a 70% win rate against most of the Harman target curves. And this community target curve, the Keymar KB50XX, it's getting dwarfed completely in these listening tests. And yeah, I mean,
So what is hi-fi endgame? How is a hi-fi endgame done?
so this is just like a guy who was like, this is the optimal amount of like bass treble in ear gain. Yeah. I mean, It's kind of funny. Like he has a YouTube channel, and like in 2021, I like discovered him talking about frequency response, and it just made me like so interested in the subject. But it's kind of like funny how he like just by himself like made this target curve, which like is outperforming Harman and all these other things. But basically, what he did is he looked at measurements of like top rated sound equipment, like the Biodynamic DT990, and you know, essentially drew a target curve which should in theory match that of like what the industry is trying to achieve with the best sounding headphones and what listeners are rating highly. So it was kind of like an intuitive process, which was interesting. But
You got lucky.
yeah.
In that test, were all the listeners aligned on the purpose of the listening test? Like, because some people prefer reference versus some prefer pleasurable listening. Was this optimized for pleasure or?
So, I mean, I guess it is optimized for pleasure in the sense that, like, you play the two sound samples and you're just deciding which one you like more. You're not really asking a question, is this more neutral or do you like it more? It's just like...
It depends on the surveyed population, right? Because some people, like if you go to a mixing engineer, they might prefer, like, they would be more biased towards a more reference experience.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I know you said this before. So, the question people were asked was, how well do you like it? -5 to +5.
So that was the original...
Right. So this data though.
This is for A/B, no preference. So
and they listen to all of A first and all of B, or how did?
So they don't have to listen to all of them. Like it just plays the sound sample, and then you can switch while the sound sample is currently playing.
And so it doesn't change the point of. I mean, you're still listening in the same place.
So yeah, it continues
restart.
over the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So
And
they
each
can
of the
flip-
sound samples is roughly like 20 seconds.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you can flip back and forth as they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm lost. Which one is win? So Keyman then PEQdB, then which one is winning?
So
88.
PEQdB has an 88.4% win rate versus the Keymar.
Okay. Yeah. So this.
So yeah, I guess this is a little bit confusing, but it was the best way to include all of this data into one like small like area.
So you have to see the column. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's symmetric, right?
Yeah.
So you could have simplified the graph by throwing out
Yeah.
one half.
Okay.
That would be making less numbers for people to read
Okay. I see.
this presentation. So going back, so the ones they preferred, the winners were PEQ. So it's a green curve here
Yeah, and the purple curve.
and
But
the purple triangle.
so I mean, we've done more follow-up experiments, and the high fan game target. So one of the things is you have so many different target curves here, and you're trying to like figure out what is really like the noise. But when it comes down to it, in direct comparisons, the high fat endgame target was beating the PEQdB target in direct comparisons.
But I mean, it's interesting because the triangle and the green are both the extremes.
Yeah.
So they're higher on the base and higher on
Yeah. So
the high end.
I mean, this is the thing. Like when we were designing the original listening test with the -5 to 5, we're basing. Hey.
We're finishing up. Go ahead.
So when designing the original like PEQdB listening test, we were basing on the assumption that the Harman studies were close enough in terms of like the bass and treble. So we really underestimated how much bass people would prefer, how much treble they would prefer, which is addressed in our new listening tests. But yeah, so that's why this verification study was interesting. It showed like, wait, people actually prefer more bass and treble. And one of like the key things was the loudness normalization we found, because the way the loudness is normalized between the sound target curves can drastically influence which people might prefer, because or which target curve people might prefer, because it's often said that, you know, people want the louder sound, right? So how do we account for that? And that was a significant challenge, and we were using the standard LUFS algorithm with a K-weighting filter originally, but we received a lot of comments from listeners that the loudness of these were completely different. And you can see like what is weighted as the loudest here is the Harman over year 2018 with linear bass. So basically the target curves which had very little bass were being played a lot louder than the target curves with bass. So what it effectively sounded like was the bassier targets were sounding quiet and muddy versus these loud sounding targets. And when you're looking at the K weighting filter, it's weighting bass pretty significantly. So we experimented with different filters and tried this filter from a paper by Fenton and Lee, and our listeners reported it as sounding very loudness normalized. And you can see that the clustering of the target curves is very similar here, except for the very bass boosted and treble boosted target curves. They're going to get pushed down significantly more in loudness, but there's clearly weight being placed on the mid-range and treble performance over the low frequencies in our current loudness normalization algorithm. But yeah, definitely an interesting point, and still something we're trying to address, because I recently tested this one target curve, which was like at 20 dB at 20 hertz, but you're trying to compare the loudness based on, this filter, which is not really factoring in the bass as much. You would kind of need to modify that. And I think there's a lot of challenges with loudness normalization, but this is what we were doing for this listening test. And yeah, so for the limitations of the study, participants are self-selecting their headphone model. So we have no way to verify that, a listener selects this headphone. Are they actually using that headphone? And does their unit match the unit we measured? That's another question we don't know. There's no listener screening or segmentation, so we don't know what percentage of this, probably like 99% male listeners in their 20s and 30s. So does this really reflect the average population or not? It's unknown. We can't verify what the sound pressure level the listener is taking this test at, but I would argue that the results should be interpreted as listeners, or each listener taking the test at their chosen or preferred listening level. And you're talking about things like the equal loudness contour. People can have different preferences across different listening levels for these target curves maybe, but we're just assuming they're taking this test at a comfortable listening level. And background noise level is uncontrolled. I don't know if people are taking this on a train or a plane. It could, change the way they...
These are all random factors that add noise.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you have most of your results off 50% level
Yeah.
suggests that in spite of these noises, you're still getting a valid signal.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Sorry, so you mentioned people reported differences in loudness.
Originally, yes, yeah.
But what are you doing to that? Because if you plug that in and I plug in some other headphone, that's going to be at a much lower level if I don't adjust.
So I was saying differences in loudness between the target curves, or...
Okay.
Yeah.
But in testing, when people are comparing two different headphones, they're going to have different loudness.
Yeah, and they would have to manually adjust the volume or loudness
But
themselves.
they probably were listening at the same volume for the whole test.
Yeah, maybe. Or they could
But if they're
adjust.
comparing two different headphones, even if they're plugged in.
Well, they would have to retake the test on the other headphone,
So you're
and
comparing two different equalizations.
then they would readjust the volume. And additionally, in this test, we tested different target curves for in-ears and over-ears, so it limits the amount of preference comparisons we can do between classes. In our follow-up studies, we've done tests only using the same target curves between in-ear and over-ears, and have found the results to be generally the same in terms of preference. And yeah, so what is our current listening test? We're using 3 sliders where a listener can adjust preference for bass, ear gain, which would be this resonance at around 3 kilohertz, and the high frequencies, which would be a high shelf filter. So we have a low shelf filter, an ear gain peaking filter, and a treble boost gain or high shelf filter, which we have 3 sliders here for bass, ear gain, and treble. We're using random mapping, so each of these starting points is randomized. So how I would think about this is that -1 to 1 represent the top and bottom ranges of each of these sliders, and the y-axis represents the relative gain. So 0 would be the starting point for orange, for example, and the relative gain could be 0.5% or 0.5 of the total 13 decibel range of each of these filters. you can increase the slider up and it would reach its maximum, or it would reach its minimum gain in this case at around 30 to 40% of the top range of the slider. Then as you keep going up, it would start increasing the gain of the range again until it reaches a certain point. But we're able to cover the entire range in a randomized and blind format such that it's not, oh, you just drag the slider up and it increases the decibel range. And one of the things about loudness normalization and using loudness under full scale is that there's a significant computational cost in terms of calculating the loudness of these various different target curves, because you need the song information too. And what we developed was a real-time predicted loudness under full scale normalization neural network. So, I mean, this is a bit exhaustive, but the procedure was starting off with a collection of 1,000 different songs, cropping different 30-second segments from these songs and computing the average spectrum, then finding the loudness under full scale using the standard algorithm, but the Fenton Lee filter 1, which our listeners identified as being more preferred or sounding more accurate than K-weighting, and then we interpolated 64 log space points across the spectrum from 0 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and then we generated a random set of EQ filters within the parameter bounds, which are set here. And for each of these EQs, we applied them to each of the segments to calculate the LUFS after the EQ change, and also computed the magnitude response of the EQ sampled at 63 different log space points. The reason 63, not 64, is because 64 just identifies the frequency bins. 63 is the locations between the points. And then we created a training pair. This is just like machine learning stuff, not really my expertise, but X is a vector, 128 numbers, and Y is the LUFS after EQ minus before EQ, and the neural network is trained to learn f of x is equal to y. So basically, we're trying to find the correlation between loudness under full scale from just the spectrum of the song, so not needing to use all of the time domain information. And with that, the Welch spectrum only needs to be computed once, and we're able to achieve O1 performance in real time. And when we're comparing the error rate between our predicted LUFS versus the actual LUFS, it was around 0.2 to 0.1 decibels on average. So I would say the results are very good when we were able to achieve like accurate loudness normalization. But yeah, so that was that. On the website, you can see our latest target curve, the PEQdB 3D target curve. This is what listeners in our latest listening test identified as sounding the most preferred. And so for identifying this target curve, it's actually like very similar to the high fan game target curve. We decided on a cutoff for which listeners we were going to actually accept results from for this personalized EQ listening test, because this is 3 trials and we're able to see how close the listeners' preferences are across the 3 different trials. So essentially, you could have listeners with completely different target curve preferences between the 3 trials, and we want to ignore their results because we're just assuming that this is noise and could be random data. So only factoring in results from listeners who got pretty consistent listening target curves across the trials, the PEQdB 3D target was identified as the most preferred. And we recently updated our shootout to, I guess, test some different target curves. And this is only like 1 trial, and there are some more tested on the over-ear side, but we're always testing different target curves to see which is the most preferred. Can we push the limits any further? And we've not been able to achieve a target curve yet more preferred than the PEQdB 3D target curve here, and you want to compare it to Harman. It's a similar story with the hi-fi endgame target curve, but basically this is where we're at in terms of what is the average listener preference. And Yeah, so basically on the website, you can select any headphone, get it automatically equalized with the preset EQ to what the average target curve says is best according to our data. And
So can you, I mean, it's not the right environment, okay, but can you show us a test of these speakers?
yeah, actually, this is a good point. So I can get audio out of these speakers, right?
Yeah, it should
okay.
work. If you specify the right audio output. Just so
I mean-
people know what you're trying to do.
There's actually a specific speaker listening test, which I think
Let's try.
would be. So the speaker calibration listening test is being done with pink noise. Where's the can you like reduce the volume to start with?
Yeah. Right, that's at the bottom now.
Okay. Increase it a bit. Is it playing out of? Okay, so I would make it a bit louder. So basically you'd want to measure like where you're going to be listening. I don't know where, if you want to like hold this.
I'll put it in the center.
Okay.
Hold it close to the, like, right up there. Yeah, okay. Is the right level now?
Yeah, actually, you can just like wave it around too, so it's able to capture an average of the area. So just like while it's happening,
Right.
so just. Okay, make sure the.
Their technology.
Okay, that's the problem. Not using the right.
Should we close the door or that doesn't matter?
Okay, let's try this. Okay, so this is the response captured in the room. They're saying there's a lot of resonances here. It's not extending below 40 hertz much, but basically what the algorithm is going to do is it's going to flatten the resonances below 300 hertz. This is the default transition frequency we're specifying. You can modify what this cutoff frequency is in the advanced settings before you take the listening test, but let's proceed with a listening test. So I guess can you increase the volume a bit? So quite a bit more. Is that the max it goes to, or? So, okay, reducing bass here. Okay, let's say that's good. So this is only focusing on bass, keep in mind, because we're not capturing any directional information from the speakers. This is like related to the speaker calibration thing I proposed earlier, which could be done full range, but you can listen to the differences here in the bass response. So I think there's more bass, and it's also like a smoother.
Wait, sorry. So I heard more bass when you want.
Yeah.
And you said there's something else you heard?
So also like the resonances of the room were being
Yes.
tamed a bit.
Yes.
Okay.
I just feel like the sound field just feels better after.
So, I mean, for the headphone listening test, it's a full range calibration. So it's going to sound weird because it's basing like the response on this headphone equalized to the diffuse field head related transfer function with adjustments, but so basically you would do that and you would be given a target curve for your EQ, and then it would automatically EQ it to that, and that would be your personalized EQ. And this, your EQ target is the average of the listening test results across the 3 trials.
So, okay. I guess I'm confused how this all fits together, because the first half of your talk was all about how do you get what people think is preference for different headphone equalizations.
Yeah.
And now you're giving people a separate set of knobs to change the EQ
So-
above and beyond what you've already fixed.
Yeah, so now this is essentially trying to identify like, okay, so the first test I was talking about was like the comparison of the target curves. This is trying to find if we can improve the average target curve, but also our listening test procedure in the sense of, okay, now we know what is the most preferred on average. We have a 13 decibel range in either direction for 3 filters. Can individuals find sounds they like more with this procedure? And I mean, I found a lot of listeners who would prefer like 6 dB less ear gain and treble. And for them, this target curve won't sound the best. And that's when the personalized.
Say it differently. The target curves are for the average. And
So
you're
you can
trying-
have individual and
then you're
average
trying
target
to, and then
curves.
you're trying to figure out what individual people.
So we're trying to find the average through what individual people like. So we average
Right,
those results,
right.
but are also trying to cater to individuals in that.
It's just an additional tweak on top of the average.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah. And I mean, data from this test won't be factored in because I just randomly put in results.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much how our listening tests are derived, and then we'll get a target curve for this, and we go into our yeah.
Let's go back. I mean, so you've got the average. You've matched. You've figured out what equalization makes most sense for headphones over all the people, and
Yeah.
now you're asking people to pick modifications in these 3 bands.
Yes.
So if you had enough data, those should average out to 0, right?
Well,
because the average is average, and now you're tweaking the average, and so
wait. So what do you mean by tweaking the average?
individuals are picking modifications to the average. So
Yes.
I want more bass or more
Yeah,
power or something. So if the whole system's working right, the whole experimental system, then those individual tweaks should average out to 0 because you've already figured out the average person wants particular equalization.
Yeah. So
And the biases are individual.
So we figured out that the individual wants a particular equalization, like such as the hi-fi endgame target curve, but our parameter set is based on the hi-fi endgame target curve, which was not identified through this test. It was identified through the comparison of the different target curves. And I guess in this test, we identified that listeners prefer slightly more low and high frequencies. This is pretty negligible, but slightly more low and high frequencies. But like if we were to like redo the parameter set based on the PEQdB 3D target, then the average should be just like the same
Yeah.
as that line. But yeah, the main point of this test is to let individuals just find what they like.
No, that's fine. I'm just arguing that on average it should be 0. If you've already equalized with the right curve,
Okay.
which you've already done with lots of people,
Okay.
and you say on average this is the right thing for everybody,
Yeah.
and then people get to tweak it,
Yeah.
then on average some should want more and some should want less.
Yeah.
So the average should be 0.
Yes, that's right.
And
Does it?
Yeah. So the average is basically the same as
No,
these.
but when they do the individual
Yeah.
band tweak, do on average that comes out to 0?
If that's the optimized one.
Yeah. So on average, this, like you're saying, like for individuals, on average, like do they get like this sound
Well, no,
profile?
when you let people personalize it,
Yeah.
you have 3 knobs.
Yeah.
Those 3 knobs should average to 0 across your entire user population.
Average
If
to
you
0.
were to take an average of all the user preferences,
Yeah.
and then take the average of that input result, because like suppose you pick high bass, I pick low bass,
Yeah.
and then
Those are
you
up.
take the entire population, the average would result in this curve.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good sanity check on the data.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so are you trying to say like if the average isn't 0, then there's something wrong with the curve?
Right.
Yes.
People just always want more bass.
Well, then it should show up.
Yeah,
in
then
the
the curve should change. You very well. Most of them want some
But
more
if they
bass.
can never get enough, they always want more.
Yeah.
So, are you almost done?
Yeah, I'm done with like presenting. I want to get to like listening tests if we have time,
So,
but or just
Can you tell us
demos. Yeah.
again why there's a boost for the bass and a boost at the mid-high frequencies?
So, for example, like when we saw with the speaker measurement, like there was significant energy in the low frequencies. This is caused by the sound waves building up. So you measure the speaker in an anechoic chamber, it's going to be flat because it's not also capturing the sound reflected by the walls. But
Right.
when you put a flat speaker in a room, there's going to be an increase in low frequency energy. And the ear resonance is based on the eardrum measurement. You have the ear naturally boosting frequencies and also other parts of the head. Yeah.
So, what that's saying is that the headphone. I was going to say it's backwards. What I was going to say. So people listening in free field
Yeah.
hear enhanced. I don't know what frequency is that. 4 kilohertz.
Yeah.
Just pick a number.
Yeah.
4 kilohertz. And when you put a headphone on, you have to boost the 4 kilohertz to match what they hear in free field.
Yes,
what
that's
they're
right.
expecting in
Yeah.
free field.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that makes sense from, I mean, I guess resonances are going to be different depending how you couple into the ear. So they're coupling from the front versus on top. You're saying that's the difference. And why is there an increased bass? Because of room reverb or typical rooms?
I mean, I think like there could be many explanations. Just like people like bass, or you put the speakers in a room, there's going to be more bass than you measure them flat. And I mean, this curve, like compared to diffuse field head-related transfer function, you look at in-room speaker measurements. I think the low frequency effects channel Dolby specifies is should be 10 dB higher than the main channels. But generally looking at the curve of speakers in a room, they're gonna have increased low frequency energy. Maybe not quite to this level, but I mean, this is what people prefer for whatever reason. And then
But really there's an issue because the musicians are doing one thing, the producers are modifying that,
yeah.
and they're going into speakers which are ideally flat,
Yeah.
but live in real rooms,
Yeah.
which is to modify things. So
Yeah.
there's all these variables that are going in.
And then there's like, how are you gonna like calibrate these speaker systems? So
Yeah.
there's still like a lot of variables. But I mean, for example, this headphone is like kind of popular, the Biodynamic DT770. I'm sure everyone knows what this headphone is. Like it has a issue in the bass response, but it's still like trying to track this target curve pretty well. The DT990.
Is this maybe because people are expecting something like in a room?
Yeah.